Hello and welcome to Dell's Gaming. I'm Dell and this is From the Depths Designer, and with this is part of our How-To series of games, and today, or in this episode, we are looking at some of the items and interface for when you are starting building a new vehicle in the designer. Now, the first part you will need to do, obviously once you are in a designer, is you start in looking out in first person view, and you'll notice I have control of all my weapons, etc. So the first thing to do is to go to the build option, which is by pressing B. And now we are in build mode. At the moment we are, as previously in previous episode, we are currently in mouse mode rather than being in keyboard mode, but that's going to be down to personal preference. In general, I'm going to use mouse mode for most of my building, but obviously if you want, everything still applies to people who want to use keyboard mode primarily. So, starting out with a new vehicle, you have two choices if you're just in the plain designer here. Number one is you could just start building on this basic platform to extend this forward however you wish, and just increase the size of this platform and make it the starting point for your vessel. That's one way you can do, so you can just expand this as you need to or as you want to until you get the vessel that you're after. So that's number one. The other alternative is if you want to start totally afresh and have a second vehicle and start with a new block from the very beginning with nothing. The way to do that is if you press the E inventory menu, so with the E key, and go down to the bottom and select new object, you have the option that says a vehicle. What this will do is start a brand new block which is part of a brand new vehicle. So if I click that now, you'll see that the mouse is still part of the main item. That's a limitation of the mouse system. If you go into keyboard mode, you'll find you can move away and it stayed green. Now normally when you move away from your starter vehicle using keyboard mode, it will turn blue because it can't place the block, but because we're in a new vehicle mode, it is allowing me to place that block. Now I'm going to go back to keyboard mode, mouse mode, just so you can see on this. Now even though this is green, if I now place this block, you'll notice it's actually separated from the main vehicle. It is now a vehicle of its own of one block. It starts with a wood block, which is fine for most cases. Now the other bit you would want to do is if we just start building on this block and just start putting blocks onto it, you'll notice it's starting to move around, and sometimes it's a bit awkward to get it to do what I want. If I started building up on this, let's just get it. We can see we're starting to tip all over the place, and it's going to get very disorientating trying to work on this vessel. So the next item is to freeze the physics on the blocks in relation to the game world. And to do that, you press the Capslock button, which on our left-hand side menu is called Freeze Vehicle. By pressing that, we are being lifted into the air. So it's taken up into the air and it's leveled out. You'll notice on the my right-hand side, my YPR, which is your pitch and roll, are all being leveled out. So they will all, the yaw is the direction I'm facing, and that will stay the same. But the pitch and roll, it's now evened out. So we're now at a nice level place where we could start building our ship and increasing the size of our vessel as we need to. So that's a handy starting point for when you want to create your vessel, and now you can go underneath easily and you haven't got to worry about going into the water or it moving around. At any time you can just press the caps lock and it gets dropped into the water, so you could test to see if it floated or what happens. and then you can just press the caps lock again and it brings it back up again so that you can have a look at what you are building. So the next stage, important factors when you are starting to build your vessel. I did highlight it previously in the previous video, but ensure you know where is the front of your vehicle. You'll notice on the very first block and on this single block pointer at the moment, there is a very big arrow pointing forwards. And that is the front of the ship. So always remember that. So when we get into propulsion, we know which side we are placing our propellers or jets or other propulsion methods in the right direction. So just be aware of that one. The other factor is obviously what is up and what is down. Again, there is an arrow in the center block, in this little block that's pointing up. Now luckily, using the caps lock key, it automatically will orientate it. If the vehicle is upside down, it will orientate it upwards. So again, that's another handy option. Another item which is easier to see at this level, but gets more difficult later on, is the center of mass icon. Now you'll notice if I move to the end down here, there we go, that's just out of the way, there's a blue line going through the center. If I leave it there, or a green line going through the item at the moment, and that is your center of mass. So that is showing you where at the moment the weight of the vehicle is. Now if we use a different block, a metal block just for the moment, and start putting some down here, you'll notice how the center of mass, because of all that weight of metal, is now moved down. So you can see where the center of your mass of your vehicle will be. This is extremely important when you start looking at aircraft, but even with ships, you will have a couple of instances or issues with the center of mass. If I show, I'll do a very simple one that seems obvious. If we created a very simple raft out of single blocks, which is not very effective, but will still show the point we have when creating a vessel and where the center of mass. If we take out that block there, if we then started to just put a mast in the front, that was just imagining that was going to be our mast for something, you can see how the center of mass is now above the center of our main deck. Now that generally means that when this goes into the water, which we'll just let it go down now by pressing the caps lock key, our center of mass is very high. If this starts going too high, or in any way outside, you can see how it's rocking at the moment, and at some point we can see it's just about almost ready to fall over, because its center of mass is very high in the water. As soon as we started to propel this along, we would most probably find that it would tip over because the center of mass is too high. If for some reason you did want this on your vehicle and we've tipped over, what you need to do is think about a keel to bring that center of mass back down. And the easiest way to do that would be to use say a lead block, which is the heaviest item. If we look at the effective weights, you can see this has got a weight of 2 per block. Metal has 0.4 and wood has 0.1. So this metal block is basically 20 times heavier than than wood block. So if we just put that in there, you can see that the center of mass has now gone centered. If we just pull that up for a second, we can see the center of mass is now roughly in the center of this main area, which is our flotation area. And that's going to keep that more upright. So that's the use of the center of mass to work out at what point your vessel is going to rotate around. Obviously you can put too much in. You can see our center of mass is actually very low now, which actually is making us almost not float. So we'll just take a little out there. That's possibly a little too much in there. So you can work out it's now floating quite nicely because our center of mass is just below the waterline, which is an ideal situation. So that was more just to emphasize the center of mass icon. And we did also show in the previous video when you can minimize the blocks. Now when you have a large ship later on, you might not be able to easily see where that center of mass icon has gone because it's hidden by a lot of the blocks. What you can at that point do is press your P key, and then you will be able to more easily see where the center of mass icon is, and will be able to adjust your balance of your vehicle to fit in with the center of the mass, so that you can ensure that everything has been balanced up if you were doing a vehicle that needed it to be the center of mass to be in the center. So now you could see, okay, our center of mass is back in the center quite nicely. So remember, that is the P key to be able to show that center of mass. Other items when you're in building is obviously you have the E menu, and we're just going to go over some of the blocks we've got here. You've got multiple sections here which have been categorized depending upon their suitability. Now obviously blocks are just simple building blocks, and you use the different types of blocks that are available. At the moment I have got it on the day one group of blocks, so the simplistic blocks. So wood blocks, as we've already seen, they have a health of 100, armor of 3. The metal block, health of 200, so double the health. An armor of 10, so very armored, and a weight of 0.4, so quite heavily armored. These are generally used for your ships which are going to be taking damage and to cover vulnerable parts of your ship. Your light alloy block has a health of 125, so it's better than wood but not as heavy as healthy as metal. Has a good armor, so much better armor than wood but not as metal, but you know, it's like an armored but light section, but its weight is very light. This is 0.5, so it's actually even lighter than wood. This is an ideal block for ships, aircraft, and basically vehicles that have to fly or are trying to be lightweight for reasons of speed, etc. But it is very expensive to build. We'll go through that in a second. And then lead blocks is a health of 150. Its main and armor of 5, but its main point is its weight of 2. These lead blocks, although expensive, are very good at balancing your larger ships. If you have too much weight at the front or rear, you can put some lead blocks in at the keel and at the bottom to change your center of mass, just like I did on this small vessel, and this will help it to stop leaning or tipping over when it's turning, etc. Obviously, well, I say obviously, generally it's not used in flying vehicles because it's just too heavy. In a flying vehicle, if you want to balance it, you could build it mainly with light alloy blocks and use a few metal blocks to do the same balancing process, because they're heavy enough but not overly heavy like the lead block. So that's those side. And I'd said about cost of items. Now, when you're in the build mode here, you'll notice at the bottom there are 5 icons. Which are not down as a text, they are down as an icon, basically a picture. First one is natural resource, and that is effectively wood, but effectively natural. The second one is a metal, which is obviously what it is. The third one is oil, which will generally be used for engines and some other blocks that need oil in them, or oil can also be used just for powering your engines. I'll go back and just say metal is used in making ammo for cannons and missiles. The fourth one is scrap. Scrap is, I don't know in the game how they class the difference between metal, but it's not raw metal, it's bits and pieces of items, scrap for want of a better word. It is generally used in cannons and engines quite considerably. And the fifth one is crystal. Now crystal is used a lot in AI components, repair components such as tentacles, repair bots, and also laser components. So it's the least used in general. The most commonly used one is resource, but it is the most abundant. Metal is used heavily in more armoured ships and is generally in the mid part of the game is the least available. Oil, once you make efficient engines, oil is generally abundant, but is always required for your engines. Scrap, if you're heavily into cannons, you may find your scrap goes low, but there is ways of making metal into scrap. So you could class it as alloy. And finally, crystal, usually fairly abundant, but although except at the very, very beginning of your campaign, and is used for the AI. So generally, you do have to keep an eye on these resources. Okay, why is this important? When we're in this building mode here, if we go back into build mode and I bring up the inventory, you'll notice that if I hover over one of the blocks, down in the bottom right hand corner, you have those symbols again, which are in this case 10 under the natural resources. If I move over to the metal block, you'll see it's 5 natural, 30 metal. That light alloy, you can see, is very expensive. We've been 10 natural, 60 metal, and 10 scrap. And lead is 100 metal. So these all have a value. The RP value is the resource point value, and it is added up for all blocks in your ship to give your ship effectively how much total resources it takes of all different types. It's a sort of like a rating for the ship, but not that accurate. So that was the blocks. You can see everything has a value when building. Again, when in sandbox mode, as we are now, we have infinite. We aren't worried about it. But if you are in the campaign, you may find that something which is too metal heavy, you will be unable to build if you don't have that number of resources. We'll just look at showing you some of the other sections just to show you the alternative values. Let's go to here. Have we got somewhere? Okay, here's a fire control computer. Uses 30 crystal. So you would need crystal to start using the those type of items. Custom cannons. You'll see that they have a lot of scrap value on them. So the firing piece is 30 metal, 30, and also oil. 6-way connectors, 60-60, and oil. Motor-driven barrel, which is your starting barrels, is 15-15 scrap. So there's a lot of scrap used in some of the basics parts of your custom cannons. We won't look at lasers at this moment. And engines. Also, you'll notice that there's a lot of oil and scrap used in most of these parts. So that gives you an idea of basically what you need to be aware of, the points you are using on your vehicle. Let's take this out again. For each of your blocks, you have different types. We have the single block. We have the let's go for the wooden beam, which is 4 blocks. And then we start having slopes. We have a 1-way slope, a 2-beam slope, and a 4-beam slope. And then we will start to have various corners in 2 meters and 1 meter to cover various options for basically making your items look nicer, for want of a better word, so that you can start to smoothen off edges, etc. There is also other advantages of these angled blocks other than looks, and that is to do with drag factor when they are put onto the front of a vehicle. Can't show this immediately without propulsion, so we'll do that when we start looking at vehicles which are water or aircraft, etc., and looking at the curved shapes. So you've got multiple blocks in each type, and each block has a different value depending a resource value and cost depending on its size. We'll take the wood as an initial example. So wood block has a 10 natural. Now a wood beam has 40. Sort of semi understandable because it is 4 single blocks put together. Your wood slope has 20 because it is slope. So all the values and costs are to a degree relative to their actual volume on them. The other side to look at, we did start on this, is the health, armor and weight, in that there is a big advantage in using a wooden beam because it has 600 health rather than the expected 400. So its value in health is sometimes not in proportion to its volume. So tend to use larger beams wherever possible for health reasons of your ship, and which will increase its survivability. So that is the basic blocks, how to start a new vehicle, what to look out for on a vehicle. Make sure you know where the front of the vehicle is, and also the center of mass, and why knowing where your center of mass is important. All important factors for your ship. Without those, you will find that your ship will go all over the place, or you'll start building it backwards, which I have done myself, or sideways. So just keep an eye on those bits and pieces. Okay, hopefully that's been helpful as to where some of these items are on the ship and what the values are in the blocks. And next time we will look at engines. So until next time, keep playing, have fun.